She stepped onto the set with a quiet grace, her posture straight, her eyes steady. There was no smirk, no performance, only calm assurance. Her blazer was simple but elegant, the kind that didn't shout for attention, but still commanded it. Emma Watson wasn't there for validation or spectacle. She was there to engage, to challenge, and perhaps to inspire. Across from her sat Howard Stern, radio's provocative legend, known more for his unfiltered questions than his sympathy. But even he seemed to pause as the energy in the studio shifted. The stage buzzed with pre-show preparation. Lights adjusted, coffee mugs aligned. The studio audience, mostly women in their 30s to 60s, whispered excitedly. "She's finishing up in makeup," came a whisper over the headset. "And she's articulate, definitely not here for fluff." Howard glanced up from his notes with a faint smirk. "Good," he said to himself. "Let's see if she prefers dialogue over praise." The intro music swelled, cameras swept across the panel. Whoopi Goldberg with her composed warmth, Joy Behar in a punchy tangerine jacket, Sunny Hostin glowing with poised hospitality. And then, from stage left, not like royalty but like a professor stepping into a seminar, came Emma Watson. Applause rose, not thunderous but respectful. She acknowledged it with a soft smile and a nod of gratitude. Whoopi leaned in. "Ladies and gentlemen, our guest today is an actress, a UN Women Goodwill Ambassador, a founder, a speaker, and someone whose voice continues to shape conversations. Emma Watson." Emma took her seat with quiet confidence, legs crossed neatly, hands resting in her lap. She turned toward Joy, offering a genuine smile, not calculated, not polished, just present. Joy opened gently. "So Emma, what brings you here today? You've been doing so much lately." Emma tilted her head slightly, thoughtful. "I'm here to talk about the responsibility of having a voice in a world that doesn't always know how to listen," she said. Her tone was soft, but her words carried weight. And how truth isn't just something we speak, but something we practice. "Too many women are still silenced," Emma continued, her voice steady and deliberate. "Too many people don't have access to the platforms needed to share their stories. I believe that if you are given such a space, using it thoughtfully, and yes, responsibly, isn't optional. It's a duty." Howard leaned back in his arms folded, a slight grin playing on his face. "Responsibly," he repeated, just loud enough for the mic to pick up the edge in his voice. "That's a loaded word." Emma turned to him calmly. "Pardon?" Howard sat forward, his tone polite but teasing. "All I mean is, when your voice echoes globally, every syllable carries weight. Doesn't it ever occur to you that sometimes silence, strategic, dignified silence, can speak louder than another film deal or podcast episode?" The room tightened. Even the air seemed to pause. Emma blinked once, then gave a soft, brief smile. "That's an interesting view, one I've often heard from people who've rarely had to fight to be heard." Whoopi chuckled gently, attempting to ease the tension. "All right, let's keep it warm in here," she offered. "Plenty to get through." But Emma didn't retreat. She turned back to Howard, her tone still measured. "Howard," she said, not condescending, but clear, "you've built your career by challenging norms, often with a disregard for the impact of your words. And I respect that you've evolved, but I do wonder, why does a woman claiming her voice seem to strike such a nerve?" A quiet murmur stirred through the audience. Howard nodded, unfazed. "Fair point, but I never claimed to be a role model. You, on the other hand, speak as a humanitarian, an advocate, a leader. So naturally, people will examine whether your messaging aligns with your platform." Joy leaned in, attempting to shift the energy. "Let's talk about your he-for-she work, Emma. I know your UN campaign's been expanding." But Emma held up a gentle hand. "If I may, Joy, I think this deserves a bit more space." She turned back to Howard, not combative, but resolute. "So let me ask you, what exactly troubles you? Is it the fact that I speak openly? That I challenge institutions? Or is it just simpler to question my sincerity because I don't fit the mold of quiet, agreeable femininity?" Howard exhaled slowly. "It's not personal, Emma. It's observational. You advocate for real issues, mental health, gender equality, literacy. but sometimes it feels like your story is always framed through a kind of misunderstood heroine lens. At what point does the story become the brand? Emma paused, not offended, but contemplative. She nodded slowly. That's a fair question, she said thoughtfully. But I'd argue that personal narrative is not a branding tactic. It's a way to humanize activism. People don't connect with statistics. They connect with stories. And if sharing mine opens the door for someone else, then it's worth the risk of scrutiny. Howard gave a faint, thin smile. Touché, he said. I never claimed to be a role model. Joy interjected with an uneasy laugh, trying to steer the ship. Maybe we can all agree. Everyone's evolving. Emma's expression remained composed. I would certainly hope so, she said, her tone light but grounded. But real evolution requires self-examination, not just a shift in language. Whoopi offered a small nod. Well said. Howard leaned in slightly, challenging. So you don't think shows like this one, platforms like this, are part of the performance? Emma paused thoughtfully before answering. I think we all have blind spots, she replied gently. And I think it's fair to reflect on whether we're creating real dialogue or just echo chambers wrapped in applause. The audience murmured. Joy looked contemplative. Howard smirked. So, polite way of saying this is still coffee table feminism? Emma looked at him directly now, voice calm but focused. No, I'm saying that if we wanted to talk about progress, we can't confuse comfort with truth. And we certainly can't dismiss conversations just because they're civil. A hush settled. Howard chuckled under his breath. You know, for someone known for diplomacy, you're not afraid to land a point. Emma offered the faintest smile. Diplomacy isn't silence, Howard. It's strategy. That was when he shifted to tone. Can I ask you something real? Emma gave a small nod. You usually do. Howard leaned in. Why are you still so angry? The word floated between them like a spark in dry air. Emma turned to face him slowly. Her expression didn't harden, but it sharpened. I'm not angry, she said quietly. I'm alert. You walked onto this set, Howard began, with a chip on your shoulder the size of Windsor Castle. But Emma, you're successful, you're free. You have global respect, a powerful platform, and every door open to you. So why does it sometimes feel like you're still at war with the world? The words lingered, dense like unspoken tension. Whoopi looked down at her notes. Joy adjusted her seat. The studio was quiet enough to hear someone breathe. Emma gave a small, controlled breath. Not a sigh, not a laugh, a pause of discipline. I think, she said calmly, that what you're reading as anger is actually purpose. I don't smile through every interview because I've learned that people confuse politeness with submission. Howard tilted his head. I think you're still letting the system define you, even as you claim to have walked away from it. Emma's brow furrowed slightly, but her tone remained even. That's not accurate. I define myself by what I build, not by what I've resisted. Howard shrugged. Then build. Show us. Talk about your work, your vision, your ideas. Not the things you escaped. The palace, the press, the trauma. Emma folded her hands on the table. You don't get to dictate the shape of someone's truth, she said quietly. Healing isn't linear, and storytelling isn't performance, it's reclamation. Howard remained calm. I'm not telling you how to speak, Emma. I'm simply suggesting that when you repeat the same narrative, people start to wonder if there's anything else. Emma tilted her head. Do they? Or are they simply uncomfortable that I continue holding a mirror up to systems they benefit from? The audience murmured again. This isn't Howard Stern Lib, she added softly but pointedly. This is The View, a space created by and for women. Maybe the mic doesn't always need to be in your hand. A few gasps, some claps. Howard raised both palms. Please, speak freely, but don't use gender as a shield to dodge genuine critique. Joy jumped in quickly, her voice light but shaky. Let's maybe steer away from identity politics. We can all agree that lived experiences matter. Emma turned to her, gently but firmly. That's just it, Joy. His implication is that my experience only matters if it fits into a particular mold. Tidy, agreeable, unchallenging. And frankly, I'm surprised he's allowed to dominate the table like this without pushback. Joy looked at caught off guard. I, I didn't mean to. I came here, Emma continued, her voice calm but filled with quiet conviction, to talk about education, sustainability, and the new work my foundation is doing with refugee women. But instead, I'm being cross-examined by someone who built his legacy on pushing boundaries without being accountable for the harm. Howard gave a cool smile. So the problem is that someone questioned you. Emma looked at him squarely. The problem is that you see questioning as power, not as responsibility. He leaned in slightly. Or maybe the issue is that no one's ever questioned you this directly before. Emma blinked, then answered slowly. You'd be surprised how many people feel entitled to question a woman's credibility the moment she speaks with certainty. Howard smirked. And yet, I'm still the one you keep circling back to. At that, Whoopi stepped in, her tone cutting clean through the static. Howard, Emma, Whoopi interjected firmly. We get it, but this is a conversation, not a cross-examination. Let's all take a breath. Emma nodded slightly, but didn't fold. I'd love to, she said softly. But it's difficult to breathe when your integrity is being dissected on national television. Howard leaned forward, eyebrows raised. Gaslit? Emma, pointing out inconsistencies in your public statements isn't manipulation. It's journalism. Emma met his gaze, calm but unwavering. Words matter, Howard, and the framing of a question can be as manipulative as the answer you are fishing for. You don't get to define journalism, he replied. Nor do you, she said, voice smooth as stone. But we both have platforms, and we both have a responsibility to use them with rigor, not spectacle. Howard shrugged. Howard shrugged. I just ask what everyone else is already wondering. Emma tilted her head. Then perhaps it's time we questioned why the default curiosity about women in the public eye is almost always skeptical. Not of their work, but of their motives. That landed, Howard smirked. That's rich. Coming from someone who's built a public image on perfection and control. You ever reflect on how curated your brand is? Emma's tone didn't flinch. Of course I do. I reflect often. And I speak about it openly. I've never claimed to be perfect, but I don't equate public evolution with performative remorse. Howard leaned back, arms crossed. I've been open about the mistakes in my past, things I'm ashamed of, like those stunts on my old radio show, but I've changed, I own it. Do you? Emma nodded slowly, acknowledging the point. Then we're in agreement on the value of accountability. But there's a difference between acknowledging past harm and using someone else's lived experience as a tool for a critique. Whoopi's voice sharpened slightly. Guys, we've got producers waving behind the cameras. Can we cool it, please? But the tension had thickened. You present yourself as a voice of truth, Emma said, her tone now sharper but still composed. But half of truth is how you tell it, and there's a very thin line between hard questions and inherited cynicism. Howard gave a half laugh. Cynicism? You think I'm threatened by you? Emma's voice lowered, now serious. Not threatened, but perhaps you're uncomfortable with women who no longer seek your approval. Howard straightened. I've interviewed some of the most powerful women in the world. Madonna, Whitney, Hillary, Gaga. I'm not uncomfortable with strong women. I'm just skeptical of people who think criticism equals oppression. The audience reacted. Applause rippled through pockets of the studio. Emma didn't flinch. She glanced at the claps, then turned back with composed clarity. I don't believe I'm being oppressed. I believe I'm being reduced. And those are not the same. Howard was silent for a beat. Emma continued. There's a difference between confronting power and distorting pain. I don't monetize suffering. I contextualize it because millions of women still don't have the luxury of pretending it's over. Joy leaned forward, eager to shift the temperature. Emma, let's talk about your new documentary. What inspired it? Emma smiled slightly, the first genuine softening of her expression. Hope, she said, not in spite of the struggle, but because of it. Joy turned to Emma with hopeful energy. Tell us about your documentary. What inspired it? Emma looked at her this time, calm but focused. Inspiration. For me, it comes from persistence, from showing up even when the world misreads your intentions, your voice, your purpose. That's what drives the work. Howard leaned in, his voice edged but conversational. You've also had the media amplify your wedding, your causes, your campaigns. You can't celebrate the spotlight when it flatters you and resent it when it doesn't. Emma responded without blinking. I don't celebrate the spotlight. I use it cautiously, strategically, and I've learned that it comes with a win, no matter the intent. Howard shrugged. But you did step into it, publicly, prominently. I stepped into responsibility, she clarified, not performance. Howard's tone sharpened. But you married into it. You knew the rules, and yet you seemed surprised when they applied to you. A beat, a hush. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. Emma's eyes met his. You think love is a contract? She asked softly. That choosing a partner comes with forfeiting your voice? Howard opened his hands. I'm saying, if you choose a palace, you can't act shocked when it has walls. Emma's jaw didn't clench. She simply nodded once. True, but just because someone enters a system doesn't mean they're not allowed to challenge it. That's how progress works, from within. Whoopi set her mug down firmly. Okay, seriously, we're done here. This is not what the show is meant to become. But Emma didn't raise her voice. She simply sat taller. You know, Howard, she said gently, you speak as if calling something into question is betrayal. But questioning unjust systems isn't rebellion. It's responsibility. Howard's voice dropped. You're a brand, Emma. And like every brand, you sell an image. But lately it feels like that image is draped in victimhood. The silence was dense, each word landing like weight on the table. Emma didn't flinch. I don't sell pain, she replied, measured and calm. I contextualize it, because ignoring it doesn't make it disappear. It just lets it grow in silence. No one moved. Joy's voice finally broke the quiet, barely above a whisper. We'll be right back. The screen faded, but the tension didn't. The third segment returned not with music or applause, but with breathless quiet. Viewers at home were leaning closer. In the studio, phones slipped discreetly into camera mode. Joy forced a tight smile. Well, it's been a lively morning here on The View. We're back with Emma Watson and guest co-host Howard Stern, and we've been discussing quite a lot. Emma sat back, not like a monarch demanding reverence, but like a scholar watching a debate unfold. Her voice was composed. Let's not pretend this has been an open discussion, she said. It's felt more like a test, a gauntlet, an ambush masquerading as curiosity. Whoopi folded her arms slowly. Emma, Whoopi said, folding her arms, you've had more speaking time than all of us combined. Emma looked to her, calm but steady. That's because I came prepared to speak, she said simply. And perhaps because what I have to say doesn't often get heard in full. Howard let out a soft chuckle. You've said plenty. The question is, has anything changed? Emma turned slightly toward him, her tone now cool, sharpened, but never cutting. Do you think change always announces itself in applause, Howard? Sometimes it begins in discomfort. And if this conversation has made people think, not just react, then something has changed. Howard smirked. You know what your problem is, Emma? Emma raised an eyebrow. Do tell. You think moral clarity is intelligence. You speak with such polished conviction, but you avoid the hard scrutiny. You create space for ideas, but not for contradiction. Emma leaned forward slightly, not as a threat, but as a presence. No, Howard, I believe that clarity is earned, and that disagreement doesn't need to be hostile, but probing becomes bullying the moment it stops listening. Howard's face remained impassive. I don't bully, I expose contradiction. That's what adults do in real discourse. Emma nodded. Then let's agree. Discourse requires not just questioning, but humility from the one asking. Howard smiled thinly, and yet I'm still the one not shouting. The audience shifted uncomfortably, some murmuring. Emma didn't take the bait. I'm not here to perform my pain for your approval, she said, and I won't trade insight for applause. Then she turned toward Joy. Let me ask you something, she said, her voice low but unshakably poised. Would a male guest be interrogated about their sincerity in this way? Or would we call it confidence? Joy blinked. Emma, with respect, you're the one who questioned our feminism earlier today because we invited him onto this set. Emma didn't deflect. She paused, then answered, you're right, that was unfair. And I'll own that. What I meant was, we can't challenge patriarchal systems if we mirror their tactics, especially toward each other. Whoopi's voice was firmer now. We didn't bring him on to corner you. He's here because he asked the questions. You wanted space for your documentary. We gave it. But when someone questions your framing, you push back as if it's betrayal. Emma didn't argue. She inhaled slowly. This is exactly what happens, she said, voice barely above a whisper, but piercing the silence. A woman shares truth, and the world asks her to smile through it, to bleed politely, to educate while being dissected. Howard, still composed, interjected. No, the world just wants to know whether the bleeding ever stops, or if it's just a setup for your next exclusive. The studio gasped audibly. Emma didn't react physically. No fists, no shouts. She just looked at him, deeply, and then calmly. You mistake perseverance for performance, but that says more about your lens than my life. Whoopi stood now, trying to take back the room. Emma, Whoopi said firmly, please don't raise your voice. Emma didn't raise anything, not her voice, not her pulse. She looked over, poised. I'm not, she said gently, but it seems passion makes people uncomfortable, especially when it doesn't smile first. Howard didn't hesitate. No, what's uncomfortable is entitlement dressed up as trauma. The words hit the room like a dropped glam. Even Joy looked stunned. The audience froze. Howard continued, his tone cool. You're just upset I didn't kneel when you walked in. Emma turned to him slowly. No, she said, her voice steady. I'm disappointed that the media still treats powerful men as sages and powerful women as suspects. Howard replied instantly. You're not being dissected. You're being asked questions. That's the cost of public life. If you want applause without accountability, start a fan club. But don't expect every stage to be a sanctuary. For a moment, the room held its breath. But Emma didn't stand. She simply folded her hands in her lap and responded with elegant finality. I don't expect sanctuaries, she said, but I do expect standards. And if public life comes with scrutiny, then perhaps media voices should also be ready to be examined. Not just the ones on the receiving end of their microphones. Howard's smirk faded slightly. Whoopi stepped forward, trying to de-escalate. All right, let's cool the temperature. Howard lifted his hand. Let her walk if she wants to. She's not interested in a dialogue. She wants a coronation. Emma's gaze didn't waver. She didn't storm out. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. I came here for a conversation, she said calmly. What I walked into was a contest. Then she looked across the table and added, and I've never needed a crown to be heard, only the courage to keep speaking. She stood, not abruptly, but deliberately. No drama, just clarity. The studio went silent, the air thick with tension and respect. A few cameras scrambled to shift focus, but the audience saw her as she moved with quiet determination behind the curtain. Joy exhaled and faced the camera, her voice subdued. Well, that happened. Howard shrugged, took a sip of tea. Whoopi shook her head. This wasn't what we planned today. No, Howard replied, but it's what we revealed. The screen faded to the View logo. Joy took a breath, her cue cards trembling slightly in her fingers. Well, we want to apologize to our viewers for the unexpected direction things took today. Obviously, things got a little tense. A little, Whoopi muttered under her breath, her gaze unfocused. Howard leaned closer to his microphone, not missing a beat. Don't apologize for conversation. You invited me here to talk. I talked. Joy turned to him, her tone more controlled now. There's talking, Howard, and then there's cornering someone under the guise of accountability. Howard shook his head. I didn't corner anyone. She walked onto this set expecting praise. I offered questions. That's not an attack. That's what this space is supposed to be. Whoopi leaned in, her voice low but resolute. Howard, I respect you, always have. But there's a difference between asking hard questions and pushing someone toward a public unraveling. Howard shrugged lightly. Then maybe the real issue isn't the question, but how fragile the answers were. Silence followed. No clapping this time. No murmurs. Just stillness. The air in the studio had shifted. Some audience members looked pensive. Others looked away. Then, in a rare moment of protocol breaking, a voice crackled through the studio PA system. It was executive producer Brian Donnie. "Folks, we'll be taking an extended break. Please remain seated." But Howard wasn't done. He turned his eyes to the camera. The red light stayed on. "You know," he began, quieter now, "there's something broken in our culture when public figures trade vulnerability like currency." He adjusted his jacket, his tone sharpening. Emma Watson walked onto this set with an image. She didn't want to debate. She wanted confirmation. And when she didn't get it, she exited. Gracefully, yes, but still an exit. He paused. No one moved. "We live in a time," he continued, "where outrage is a resume and narratives trump nuance. Emma talks about truth, but only on her terms. That's not discourse, that's branding." He let the silence settle, then concluded, "I didn't insult her. I didn't raise my voice. I asked questions. She called that an attack. Think about that." The camera stayed on him for a beat longer than usual, but there were no cheers, no echoes, just a void. Then Whoopi finally broke the tension, her voice a near whisper. "We'll be right back." So now we ask you, was Howard Stern simply doing his job? Or did Emma Watson show us that silence, when principled, can speak louder than provocation? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe conversations should challenge without crushing, subscribe to Celeb Courage Chronicles. Because next time, it might not be Emma walking off stage. It might be the audience.